The small-town police officer in Ohio had shot a 17-year-old kid on a supermarket parking lot, mistaking his phone for a weapon, and he had done it in front of a dozen people and the camera of his own body cam. His name was Mike Harper. He was 42. He had served in the department for almost 20 years. He had taught his son to respect the badge and had always believed that those things happened somewhere in big cities, but not to him. Now he was on administrative leave, waiting for an internal investigation, afraid not only of losing his badge and his pension, but also of finally destroying the little respect that remained from his son and from the street where everyone knew each other. And the hardest thing was that deep inside he knew. It was not an accident and not one bad night. It was the result of his personal compromises and convenient silence over the last years. He had grown up in Springfield, Ohio, in a one-story house with a low porch, an old flag above the door, and a mailbox on a long wooden post by the road. His father worked at a plant. His mother had side jobs at a local laundry near the strip mall. In the evenings, they watched the news and argued about politics, and on Fridays, they drove out for pizza in a cardboard box by 6 o'clock to be in time for the high school football game. Mike had decided early that he would stay there, because he believed somebody had to stay, to patrol those same long roads and empty parking lots and not move away somewhere better. His police service started right after his time in the Marine Corps. He came back, went through the academy, got a uniform, a gun, a patrol car, and the authority to tell people that everything was under control. The shifts were long, and reality turned out boring and heavy. Domestic calls, petty shoplifting at the Walmart by the highway, late-night fights near fast food joints, and the endless smell of cold fries and spilled coffee in paper cups on the car's dashboard. Years went by, he got used to overtime, picked up extra shifts to pay the mortgage, the insurance, and the sneakers with the high school team logo for his son Dylan, missing his games because somebody had to be on duty. The mistakes piled up too. 6 years earlier, he had signed an incident report that slightly softened what his then partner had done. The partner had thrown a suspect down on the asphalt harder than the rules allowed, and the guy walked away with bruises, but did not file a complaint, and the command preferred to record it as reasonable use of force. Mike saw that it was wrong. He felt that this was how the system pretended things were fine when they were not. But he signed because it was easier, because it protected their own and his pension. Back then he told himself it was a small thing, that he was still basically a good cop. Now he knew that had been the first crack. And then came that evening on the supermarket parking lot, when dirty snow lay on the ground, when ice crunched underfoot and breath turned into steam, and the phone in the frightened teenager's hand looked to him like a flash of metal. He shouted a command, but his body was already pressing the trigger because his training had drilled an automatic fear response, and the shot came before the thought. He remembered a woman's scream, remembered how the plastic grocery bag tore and apples rolled across the asphalt, remembered the black rectangle of the phone in the boy's falling hand. Now everything had shrunk to a single day when the department, the town, and his own family were waiting for an answer, what he would say, whom he would blame, and what he would accept as his own fault. That morning, a week after the shooting, he sat at the kitchen table in his house on the quiet street, looking at 2 mugs of cooling filter coffee and at the stack of mail, bills, flyers, a letter from the department with the official notice of the upcoming city council hearing. Outside stood his old Ford pickup, dusted with road salt after recent snowfalls, and the empty street where the school bus had already passed. The house was too quiet because Dylan had left earlier than usual without looking into the kitchen, and Mike had noticed that. He felt not just anxiety, he felt a physical, heavy shame. It seemed to him that the badge, now lying in the drawer, was staring at him. The local TV station had again shown an edited clip from his body cam the night before, slowing down the moment when he shouted, "Drop it!" and his finger was already moving on the trigger. The anchor spoke in an even tone. They discussed protocols, race, statistics. But in Mike's head, everything condensed into one question. Had he not been the one telling Dylan that a good cop thinks first and only then shoots? He finished the already cold coffee, got up, took the keys to the pickup from the sideboard, and the envelope with the notice. He had to drive to the department for the internal affairs meeting. In that first scene of the day, he wanted only two things: not to break under questioning and not to hide behind a lie. He understood these two desires could conflict. The internal investigation took place in a small, stuffy office with no windows on the second floor of the department, where he had previously been only when escorting someone else. On the table stood a recorder, next to it a stack of printouts. Across from him sat the internal affairs investigator and the union representative. The investigator, a man with a narrow face and a neat tie, started in a dry, procedural way, asking about the weather, visibility, lighting in the parking lot, whether Mike had eaten dinner, and how many hours in a row he had been on duty. "You were on, what, your 46th hour without proper sleep, correct?" the investigator clarified, looking at the papers. "I had a short break," Mike said. "Couple hours at home." The union rep, a stocky man with a tired face, inserted comments several times. He was in a state of stress fatigue. The shift was understaffed. The department did not provide adequate manpower. Mike sat and listened, feeling everything clench inside him. They were talking about hours of sleep and the lighting, but no one was saying out loud the main thing: he had shot a kid with a phone. At some point, Mike heard his own voice from the side when he answered, "I observed an object in his hand that I perceived as a weapon." The sentence sounded like it came from a report, not from his insides. He was distancing himself from what he had done. That scared him. At one point, the investigator raised his eyes. "Officer Harper, if you had a second chance on that parking lot, would you act the same way?" There was a pause. The union rep touched his elbow lightly under the table, as if reminding him he needed to be careful. In Mike's head flashed, "Say yes. It is safer. That is what they always say." But another part of his mind could no longer play that game. "No," he said quietly, "I would not shoot." The investigator nodded, wrote something down. The union rep pushed his chair back a bit louder than necessary, but stayed silent. At the end of the meeting, Mike walked into the hallway with the sense that he had taken a small but irreversible step. He understood that his answer had made it harder for him to be cleared, but for the first time in those days, he felt he had said something that matched his conscience. He began to realize that his real problem was not only the investigation, but his own habit of hiding behind phrases and statistics. On the department parking lot, another conversation was waiting for him, one he had not prepared for. Dylan was standing, leaning on the fence by the high school stadium across the street, in his hoodie with the team logo, and in the same sneakers Mike had bought him on credit last spring at a sporting goods store. When he saw his father, he did not wave, just stayed where he was. Mike walked up, feeling a heavy wave rising in his chest. "You should be at school," he said, trying to sound calm. "We have practice later," Dylan replied, still looking at the stadium. "You wouldn't be there anyway." It was not just a remark. It was an accusation. Over the years, the boy had collected too many missed games, too many evenings when his father came home after midnight, smelling of cheap coffee and burgers, leaving an empty pizza box on the table to pretend they had almost had dinner together. Mike began and faltered. "Did you see the news?" "Everybody saw it," Dylan said. "They already made memes in the group." He said it without anger, almost tired, and that made it hurt more. "I made a mistake," Mike said. "They say you're like a racist," his son interrupted, "that you shot because he looked the way he looked. Is that true?" Mike felt everything inside flip. He knew the town was split between those who supported the cops and those who, at every meeting, now shouted about a systemic problem, and he understood that his son was trapped between those groups. "I shot because I was scared," he said honestly, "and because too many times I believed that danger is whatever looks like a weapon. I was wrong." Dylan finally turned and looked him in the eyes. "Everyone says you better find a good lawyer," he said, "and I don't know what to say when they ask what I think about you." That sentence hit harder than any newscast. Mike suddenly clearly felt he was more afraid of his son no longer seeing any decent person in him than of any court. "Tell them you have a father who really screwed up," he said quietly, "and who is at least trying not to lie right now." Dylan did not answer. He just nodded and walked toward the school, shifting his backpack to the other shoulder. Mike stayed by the fence, listening to the music already playing at the stadium for the warm-up. He understood that his son feared his disgrace more than he respected his badge, and that was an honest realization. In the afternoon he was called to a meeting with the chief. The chief's office looked as it always had: flag in the corner, board with employee photos, a wall display with slogans about service, the smell of old coffee and cleaning solution. Also, there were the union rep and a lawyer the department had brought in to prepare for the city council hearing. "The situation is complicated," the chief said, shuffling papers. "The council is under pressure. The media are heating it up. We need you to stick to the line." "What line?" Mike asked. The lawyer slid a folder toward him. "The line that your actions were within protocol," he said, "that you did not have time to assess the threat, that you followed your training. We do not admit guilt, because that creates a precedent and hits the entire department." Mike flipped through the prepared text, where his personal experience was reduced to a dry set of formal phrases. There was no kid named Jaden there, no mother screaming on the parking lot. There were only suspect, object in hand, and reaction to a perceived threat. "But I already told the investigator that if I could, I would not shoot," Mike reminded them. "That is an internal protocol," the lawyer cut him off. "At the public hearing, you will say something else. We cannot afford to admit error on the record." The chief frowned but stayed silent. It was clear he himself was caught between politics and conscience, but he had chosen politics long ago. "Mike," the union rep said quietly, "you have a mortgage, you have a kid. You understand that if you start saying too much, you will not just lose your job, you will drag all of us down." A tired anger mixed with exhaustion rose in Mike's chest. He saw that the people who had gone through night calls and drunken fights with him were now talking not about the boy, not about what was right, but about mortgages and stats. "And what if I already dragged everyone down by what I did?" he asked, and silence fell in the room. The lawyer sighed. "This is not a conversation for the record," he said. "Let us get back to the text." Mike listened as they discussed word choices and felt his alienation growing. He understood that for them, he was now an object of crisis management, not a man trying to understand where loyalty ends and honesty begins. At the end of the meeting, he took the folder, but knew he would not be able to say this text without betraying himself completely. In the evening, he did not drive home, but went to the neighborhood where he had responded to calls for years. Old two-story houses, a neon-lit laundry, a small convenience store by the road, always smelling of chips and cheap hot dogs. In one of those houses lived Jaden's mother. Officially, he had been advised not to contact her, but he realized that if he did not at least try to look her in the eye, he would remain the kind of man who hides behind lawyers and command. He climbed the worn-out stairs and knocked. A woman in her early 40s opened the door, tired but composed, with eyes that showed no tears and no obvious anger, just a kind of emptiness. "I know who you are," she said, before he could introduce himself. "Mrs. Brown, he swallowed. "I wanted—" "You wanted to apologize?" she asked. "Or you wanted me to tell you I understand?" He lowered his eyes. "I wanted to say I am guilty," he said quietly, "and that the way they talk about you on the news now, the way they discuss your life, that is wrong." She stepped back into the apartment, but did not close the door. Inside there was the smell of fried food and laundry detergent. The TV was on low, the anchor talking about the city council. On a chair by the wall hung Jaden's jacket, and his school backpack lay on the floor. "You took my son from me," she said calmly, and know I am guilty will bring him back. I know, he said, and I know I have no right to ask for forgiveness. Then what do you want? She asked. He thought. What did he really want? Justification? Relief? I want you to know that at the hearing I am going to say it was my mistake, he said, not just objective circumstances. She raised her eyebrows slightly. You think that is going to make it easier for me? I think it is at least the honest thing to do, he answered. She looked at him for a while, then nodded. Do whatever you want, she said. I do not care any more what happens to you. But if you have a son, she paused, her eyes stopping on his wedding ring, do not make him live with the fact that his father lied. Those words hit the most painful spot. He nodded, thanked her, and went down the stairs, feeling the cold air biting his lungs. He understood that the people he had tried to serve were always most sensitive to whether you lied to them or not, and that now his choice was not between careers and lawyers, but between honesty and yet another attempt to hide. The next day, a local TV reporter caught him in the supermarket parking lot. She stood with a paper cup of coffee, the cameraman adjusting the camera nearby. Officer Harper, can you comment on the upcoming hearing? She asked. He previously would have brushed it off, but now he stopped. I will come and say what I think I have to say, he replied. Do you admit guilt? She pushed. He hesitated for a second and realized that he was again standing in front of a small choice. I admit I did something I was not supposed to do, he said. The rest you can phrase however you like. The reporter was surprised by such bluntness, but she recognized a headline when she heard one. The town is divided, she said. Some call you a hero who made a tough choice, others a killer. What do you call yourself? Everything tightened inside him. What did he call himself? A man who now has to live with what he did, he said, and who is obligated to tell the truth, even if that makes things worse for him personally. He got into his pickup, leaving her with that answer. He did not like that his words would become part of yet another news segment, but he at least felt he was no longer playing the familiar game of no comment. He began changing his role in the story, instead of being just an object of other people's narratives. In the evening, on the eve of the hearing, he sat in the empty living room, the TV showing a football game on low volume. Old newspapers lay on the couch, and a pizza box from the previous day sat on the coffee table. Dylan was in his room, the door closed. They needed another talk. He knocked, and without waiting for an invitation, opened the door a bit. His son sat at the desk doing homework, a laptop open next to him with a social media feed full of hot takes about the town and the police. I am going to speak tomorrow, Mike said. I know, Dylan answered shortly. I am not going to read what they wrote for me, his father went on. I am going to say it was my fault. Dylan shrugged. Is that going to make you feel better? For me, I do not know, Mike said honestly, but I do not want you to think your father is hiding. Dylan was silent for a while, then said, If you lie, I am not coming. If you tell the truth, I might show up. It was not a promise, but it was a chance. Okay, Mike said, I am not going to push you. He walked out, feeling how strangely fear of the next day intertwined with a tiny hope that at least one person in his house would see he was trying to be different. Lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, he suddenly asked himself, is a hero someone who never makes mistakes, or someone who is not afraid to step out and name his mistakes out loud when it is painful and dangerous? That rhetorical question suddenly sounded louder in his head than the TV in the living room. He realized he had spent his life putting on the image of the good cop, but it was far more important now to be a grown man. The day of the city council hearing took place in the high school gym because a big crowd was expected. Folding chairs, the smell of cleaning chemicals and old basketballs, plastic water bottles on the table of the council members, microphones that occasionally squealed with ugly feedback, team banners hung on the walls, vending machines stood nearby. Everything looked oddly familiar and at the same time strange, because now this gym had turned into the place where they would decide his future and discuss his name. Mike sat in the first row, in a simple shirt, no uniform, no badge. Next to him sat the lawyer and the union rep. Behind him he could feel the eyes of dozens of people, co-workers, reporters, neighbors, parents of Dylan's classmates. Somewhere in the back, he spotted Jaden's mother, with a few activists beside her holding signs. The noise in the gym reminded him of a game about to start, only the stakes were different. The chair of the council opened the session, gave the floor to the police chief, who spoke about the difficult work of the department, understaffing, and the need to wait for the investigation results. Then community members spoke. Some shouted about a systemic problem, others argued they had to support our guys. Then his turn came. The lawyer leaned over and whispered, "Stick to the script." Mike took the prepared folder, walked up to the microphone, and looked at the crowd. In the middle rows he saw Dylan's face. His son had come, sitting with his shoulders tense, next to some friends. Their eyes met for a second, and in that moment, Mike knew no piece of paper could help. He put the folder on the table and pushed it aside. "My name is Mike Harper," he began. "I served in our department for almost 20 years. I was on duty at night when you were asleep. I showed up when you were fighting with your neighbor or when someone in your house was having a heart problem. I drove people to the shelter. I paid for someone's burrito wrapped in foil at a late-night spot because I saw he had no money but was sitting in the rain for 3 hours. I drove your kids home after practice when the buses were done for the day. I always thought you could justify a lot of things with that." He paused. The gym quieted. "That night on the supermarket parking lot I was on about my 46th hour without decent sleep," he continued. "But that is not an excuse. I saw a phone in a kid's hand and perceived it as a gun. I yelled a command, but my finger was already on the trigger. I fired and Jaden Brown went down. He was a 17-year-old kid. He had a phone, not a weapon. That is a fact." Someone in the audience sobbed, others whispered. He held on to the edge of the podium and went on. "I have been asked to come here and speak in general terms about protocols, about perceived threat, about how hard this job is," he said. "But the truth is, I was wrong, and this is not my first mistake. 6 years ago, I signed off on a report that toned down what my partner had done when he used more force than necessary. Back then, nobody got seriously hurt, and I told myself it was just a work moment. But it is exactly from those little things that a situation like a dead teenager on a parking lot grows. That time I chose to protect the system from the truth. Today, I do not want to do that anymore." He felt his voice shake but did not stop. "I understand that what I say right now can cost me my job, my pension, my health insurance, my ability to pay bills," he said. "I understand that some people in this room would feel more comfortable if I said, I did everything right according to the book. But I look at my son sitting there in the middle, and I understand. If he grows up thinking his father hid behind paperwork and someone else's words, that will be worse than any termination." He looked toward Dylan. His son sat motionless, staring straight at him. "I am not asking for your forgiveness," Mike went on. "I have no right to do that. Mrs. Brown no longer has her son, and nothing I say here will change that. I am not asking you to keep me on the job. This is not a vote on my career. I am asking you to do what you think is right for this town. If you decide that a man who made this kind of mistake should not wear a uniform anymore, I will accept it. But I am also asking you not to close your eyes to the conditions we created ourselves, the overtime, the way we train young officers to be afraid first instead of think first, the way we got used to ignoring the small violations because it is easier that way." He paused again. The gym was silent but for a faint crackle from the microphone. "I am ready to leave the department if that is your decision," he said, "but I will leave with one intention. I will stay in this town. I will not run away and hide. I will still come to the same stadiums, the same stores where you will see me, and if anyone wants to walk up and tell me what they think, they will be able to do that. Because I believe serving people is not just about the uniform and the badge. It is also about being able to look them in the eye after you have screwed up and not hide." He felt he had said everything he could. I am guilty, he finished simply, and I want to live from now on in a way that makes this town have fewer people who are more afraid of their mistakes than of the truth. He stepped away from the microphone. A heavy silence hung in the gym. Then someone started clapping, uncertainly but sincerely, and at the same time someone shouted something angry. Mrs. Brown did not clap. She sat with her hands clasped, but there was no contempt in her eyes, only exhaustion. That was enough for him. He was not looking for her forgiveness. He wanted her to see he was not hiding. The council members exchanged looks. The procedural talk began. Some spoke about the need for an independent investigation, some about reforms, some about the budget. For Mike, it all sounded like background noise. The main thing had already happened. He had spoken out the truth he had been hiding from himself for years. As he left the gym, he saw Dylan by the door. His son stood holding a plastic bottle of water, looking at his father not as a hero or a criminal, but as a man he was still trying to figure out. "Well, you kinda went all in," Dylan said when they were side by side. "Guess I do not have much chance at a calm retirement anymore," Mike tried to joke. Dylan did not smile, but he did not turn away either. "Are they going to fire you?" he asked. "I do not know," Mike answered honestly. "Most likely." His son nodded. "I thought you were going to lie," he said quietly. "Everyone said you would." "I thought so too," Mike admitted, "until not long ago." Dylan sighed. "I was ashamed to leave the house in the mornings," he said, "but now I still feel bad. But it is at least not as shameful to say you're my dad." That sentence hit him like a warm punch. Mike felt something inside him straighten just a bit, like breathing got slightly easier. He understood this was not forgiveness and not an ending. It was just the start of a long road. Within a few weeks the decision was made. The city council recommended his termination, and after the formalities the department let him go. He turned in his badge and gun, signed the paperwork at HR, took from his locker his best dad mug and his old jacket. Co-workers reacted in different ways. Some patted him on the shoulder, some avoided his eyes, some whispered, "You screwed all of us." He did not argue anymore. Life slowly shifted from the patrol car to the ordinary house, where in the evenings he now turned the knob on the washing machine at the coin laundry by the road himself, swept crumbs from the kitchen table after Dylan ate directly over his homework, and thought about what he would do now. He got a part-time job at the school sports complex, helping with security at games and practices. Ironic, but honest, because he was finally where he had always wanted to be, in the stands, close to his son. One evening, closer to spring, they sat in the backyard. It was still chilly, but the snow had almost melted. The air smelled of wet earth and the smoke from a neighbor's grill. On the plastic table stood 2 mugs of cheap filter coffee. Next to them, a plate with leftover pizza they had not finished while watching the news. Inside the house, the TV was running quietly, the anchor talking about another scandal and another election, but the volume was turned down. Dylan was playing with a basketball, spinning it in his hands. "Do you miss the patrols?" he suddenly asked. Mike thought about it. "I miss the feeling that I am helping," he said, "but I do not miss how we sometimes pretended things were fine when they were not." His son nodded, was silent for a bit longer, then said, "At practice today, a guy said you kind of sold the cops out. I told him you just finally stopped lying." Mike looked at him, feeling a strange mix of pain and gratitude. "And what did he say?" He shrugged. Dylan smirked faintly. "Said that is not what brothers do." "Maybe brotherhood is not just about keeping quiet when someone does something wrong," Mike answered softly. They fell silent. Somewhere down the street the school bus drove by, bringing kids back from another game. Thin clouds stretched across the sky. Today's newspaper lay on the mailbox by the road. He had not picked it up yet. The house looked like an ordinary American house, which was exactly what it was, with the old couch in front of the TV, with sneakers by the door, with a flag on the porch that now, for Mike, meant not some abstract patriotism, but a simple idea: live honestly in the place where you live. He understood that his mistake had not gone anywhere and would not be erased. The town would remember that evening on the parking lot for a long time. His name would trigger arguments. But he also understood he now had the only thing he could truly control: how he would live from here on among these people, how he would talk to them, how he would raise his son. This story did not make him a flawless hero. It made him an adult man who once stopped hiding behind the badge and the stats and chose to admit his guilt out loud, accepted the consequences, and stayed in the place where everyone could see his mistake. And that, more than the badge that had once shone on his chest, became his real uniform of responsibility toward that small town in Ohio he still chose to call his own.